A successful investment manager on Wall Street's inspiring others, bringing him back to the Catholic Church. Stephen Auth has reached out to millions of people on the streets of New York City.
His outreach is typically centered around high holy days, and he details the story behind these missions in his new book, The Missionary of Wall Street, From Managing Money to Saving Souls on the Streets of New York. Stephen Auth joins us now to share his journey and how he balances being a senior executive and a missionary. He's the executive vice president of Federated Investors. He also sits on the national board of the Lumen Institute, that is a faith-based organization for business leaders, which he helped to found. Stephen, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Crystal.
So there's a seeming tension at the center of your life here, and I wanted to ask you about it straight off. So what do you think of the fact, and do you think it is moral, that we live in a society with such vast inequality that the 20 richest people in the country have more wealth than the bottom half, the bottom 150 million people combined? Is that fundamentally moral?
I think, you got to be a pragmatist, Crystal, like the alternative. The alternative's worse.
What is the alternative?
Well, the alternative is, we've tried the alternative. Socialism is probably the most typically used one. You can apply Catholic social teaching, some people do, and say, just give everything away.
But I think
but
that's
it destroys incentives in an economy, and it doesn't work well.
I think that's a strongman argument, because we've done things differently, even just looking at our own past. Under the New Deal, we had a period of prosperity where incomes were flattening, where the middle class was expanding, which is the opposite of what we have now. So are you saying we really can't tinker at the edges of, this is a very intentional choice we've had to have this particular kind of capitalism. Don't we have other choices on the range of the spectrum that we can make?
We've always had a pretty large dichotomy between the people at the very top and everyone else. I would, you can make the case for sure that the whole country is more affluent today than it was 20 years ago. It's absolutely the case. So I don't think that means that you can't, hope and aspire for more. And in my case, my focus is more on people's spiritual lives. When Mother Teresa came over here, she said, this country is poor, but it's poor spiritually more so than materially. When you want to see poverty, you go out to the Philippines, to the shanty towns, or to India. And my wife and I are involved with some of those projects to try to improve education in those areas and things like that, for sure. But in our country, my focus is on the spiritually poor, because I think it's a much bigger issue and a much bigger problem.
Well, here's the real question then, which is, can you help the spiritual lives of your citizen through government? Which is, can you strengthen the institutions and the areas of people's lives which are most lacking, which contribute to their spiritual life, through the government? This is a central debate happening right now in the Catholic Church.
Yeah, that's scary to me. I know I'm on a political show here, but I'm not a big fan of having the government do too much of anything, frankly. And because, always well-intentioned, but very poor implementer of ideas. Bureaucracies have a way of ending up feeding themselves and not really accomplishing the original objective. So I'm much more comfortable with private efforts to improve people's spiritual lives, rather than try to get the government to legislate it.
Tell us about those private efforts that you're up to, and what really motivated you to write this book?
Well, two questions. One, the private effort is a street evangelization mission. I mean, it's a kind of crazy concept, you'd think, on the streets of New York to be out there. We've been doing this now for 11 years. We've had over 1,000 missionaries. As you mentioned, we've spoken to over 3 million people. But, the inspiration was from my wife, who suggested we do this. I thought it was a crazy idea. And what I've discovered is that there are a lot of people wandering around the streets of New York, and perhaps the whole country, that are pursuing kind of secular dream that they've told is going to make them happy. And deep down inside, they're not real happy, because when you cut yourself off from your Creator, bad things happen. And a lot of them are just waiting for someone to tap them on the shoulder and show them a way back to a spiritual life. So I've been amazed at the reaction of people, a cross-section of the city, and a lot of them are described in The Missionary of Wall Street. It's a series of dialogues with basically a cross-section almost of the world, because about 1/3 of the people we meet come from outside. The city's such a tourist attraction.
Sure, and a melting pot.
And the mission, people think the mission must be in some, impoverished area of New York, South Bronx or something, and is actually in the most affluent neighborhood in New York City, in Soho. And we'll stop people on their way to a fancy dinner with their friends and get involved in a spiritual discussion on the streets that turns their lives around, or it seems to. And it's actually pretty incredible. And the book, the inspiration was, I've been writing these blogs, these little stories for years from this person just called a missionary, sort of anonymous. And a lot of folks have been keeping after me, Steve, you should make this into a book. And so the book is a story about how this happened. And, people have read it, and they say it gives them hope, it gives them inspiration, it gives them a sense of the mystery that is still in our lives. I would call it God, is that mystery, and that we're kind of losing track of in the current cultural dialogue that is so, frankly, anti-God.
And Stephen, I want to get your thought. I would phrase things differently. I'm not a particularly religious person, but I do think that there is a sort of spiritual breakdown in the country that is reflected in the fact that you have rising suicide, you have the worst addiction crisis that we've had in our nation's history, you have life expectancy actually going down, right? I think that is part of maybe what you're getting at here. What do you attribute that to, though? Because isn't the fact that the core idea that's been sold to us by capitalism, that we can be happy if we just have more stuff, is effectively morally bankrupt and spiritually bankrupt?
Doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
Yeah, and we get overly attached to the stuff, and the stuff doesn't make us happy. The more stuff we get, the less happy we are.
But how do you square that with your business? And I excuse me for pressing on this, but financialization and the crisis and all that is what hollowed out this country in 2008, and the repeated financialization and commoditization of so many of the elements of our economy screws consumers over and over again. And so how it's that which causes people to lose hope and become, truly despaired in their lives. And a little bit of, a spiritual life is great, but ultimately if that infrastructure is not there, then you're going to be down a very dark place. So how do you square those tensions?
So my business is managing people's retirement money, in effect, right,
Sure.
Sagar? So, when
I
I
think I'm
first
talking
became
about
the
Wall
chief
Street, the
investment
financial
officer, we were
industry.
running $7 or $8 billion.
We're not trying to lay the financial crisis at your feet,
I'm
but you're
talking
part of a
about
broader
Wall Street
industry and
generally.
culture.
Yeah.
Well, I would say that, and this is maybe a second book that's out there, but in my world, Wall Street has a lot of very negative characters involved in it. In fact, when the publishers came with the title for the book, it was a little bit of a play on, obviously, the Wolf of Wall Street, right?
Yeah.
And in my world, I come at it from the investment management side. So again, we're managing people's futures, in effect. Mm-hmm. And so what I have found is that over the long haul, maybe over the short haul you could take some shortcuts, but over the long haul, JudeoChristian virtues, if you will, play extremely well.
What do you mean by that, play extremely well?
Well, integrity, obviously, right? You could cheat somebody in the short term and sell them a bad loan or whatever. Over the long term, you've lost the customer. So integrity is an obvious one. But, let's just say December. The world was falling apart. We had a very optimistic view. I was the high guy on the Barron's Roundtable. Even my own sales force was asking me, Steve, this sounds crazy, 3,100 on the S&P. We're down at 2,450 here. And my mantra to our investment teams was humility at the highs, confidence at the lows. Integrity always. And so there's an example, I would say, where investment people and Wall Street can do very well with Judeo-Christian virtues. We are obviously not at a high in December of 2018. And that's when you need to have a little bit of confidence. That's a Christian virtue, confidence, joy. Humility is the foundational virtue of Judeo-Christian theology, if you will. And it is the one thing that destroys Wall Street people. They get successful, they start to think they're bigger than their britches, and they make a big mistake, and they blow something up. And a lot of my job as the chief investment officer is to keep people humble when we're doing well and remind everyone, look, things could go wrong. So I would say these kinds of virtues play very, very well, actually, in Wall Street. And despite the sort of cartoonish characterization of Wall Street people, there's a lot of Wall Street folks that share those virtues. You know, your lead in here was the Missionary of Wall Street, you know, has been talking. I mean, there's 1,000 missionaries that are doing this. I'm the leader, but there's a lot. The Lumen group that I'm a member of is composed of Wall Street people.
I think the question is not so much on an individual, personal basis, the values, but it's about participating in a systemic dynamic that has led to the hollowing out of most of small town America, that has led to putting consumerism at the center of the culture, that has led to, you know, a financial collapse that nearly destroyed our country and the world economic system, for which there was never any accountability. So it's less the individual personal virtues and whether there's a systemic problem here that is contributing to that spiritual bankruptcy and moral bankruptcy that you're talking about.
Yeah, and I would keep coming back, Crystal, to, you know, it's not a perfect system, but they haven't discovered a better one.
But again,
I've been involved in so many crises around the world.
Because we have done things differently before. We've had stronger labor rights where workers had more power in their workplace. We, you know, Social Security is the most popular social program here and perhaps around the world. Medicare provides health care at much cheaper costs and with much lower overhead than private health insurance. So it's not like we've always had this particular system of capitalism. We have higher levels of inequality now than we've had since the Gilded Age. So can't we change that system so that more people can prosper, so that communities can thrive, and the sort of spiritual life that you're talking about can have the chance to blossom and take hold?
I'm all for constructive suggestions on how you can improve the system. I don't think the system's perfect. I think at the edges it can be improved, sure. I wouldn't disagree with you there.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so
What
much,
I take exception to is
Yeah.
radical changes in the system to a more socialist system, because I've seen that all over the world, the terrible failures that results in.
Well, FDR once said it's time to be radical for a generation. In my view, I think we're at that same place, but we'll agree to disagree today. We appreciate your time and your
Thanks
thoughts.
for having me.
Thank you,
Steve.
sir.
Great to have you.
Appreciate it very much.
Next on Rising, politicians, analysts, and cable news hosts have all wondered, is there a method to Trump's so-called madness?
A new book chronicles the insights, stories of more than 100 subjects, to tell the story of President Trump's rise, that when Rising continues.